At my daughter's birthday party, my sister-in-law said, "It's awful, how could she wear such a dress? She never had any taste." My daughter's cousin laughed. I didn't stay silent, but asked for quiet and said something that made my husband's parents panic. The worst thing about that day wasn't the insult. It was the laugh that followed it. My daughter Ava had just walked down the staircase at her 18th birthday party when my sister-in-law Rachel leaned toward my mother-in-law and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "It's awful. How could she wear such a dress? She never had any taste." And then Rachel's daughter, Chloe, laughed. Not awkwardly. Not nervously. She actually laughed. The music was playing, people were holding glasses of champagne, someone was filming on their phone. Ava froze halfway across the room. She had chosen that dress after weeks of saving from her part-time job. It was elegant, fitted, deep emerald green. Different from what other girls her age would pick, but it suited her. She looked at me for a second. Not crying. Not angry. Just confused. Like she was asking, is it really that bad? Something inside me snapped. This wasn't the first time Rachel had tried to put Ava down. For years it had been little comments about her not being social enough, not dating enough, not dressing trendy enough. Always disguised as concern. But this was her 18th birthday. We had rented a beautiful venue in downtown Columbus. Mark's parents insisted on inviting extended family, business acquaintances, people Ava barely knew. They said it should be classy. Rachel had arrived late, already scanning the room like she was inspecting it. I walked to the center of the hall and raised my hand. "Can we have a moment of quiet?" The music faded. Conversations stopped. Ava was standing near the cake table, completely still. Rachel looked irritated. "Oh please, I was just saying." "No," I said. "Let's all just take a second." I turned toward Ava. "You look stunning." She gave a small nod. Then I faced Rachel. "Since we're sharing opinions tonight, I think it's only fair that we share everything." Mark, my husband, shifted uncomfortably. His father, Thomas, immediately stopped smiling. My mother-in-law Diane looked at me the way she does when she senses a storm coming. Rachel crossed her arms. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, "that if we're going to criticize young women in front of a room full of guests, we should also be honest about why some people are really uncomfortable tonight." Rachel blinked. The room felt smaller. And then I said the one sentence I had promised myself I would never say at a family event. "Maybe the dress isn't what's bothering you. Maybe it's the fact that Ava got into Stanford on her own." The air left the room. Chloe stopped smiling. Thomas went pale. Rachel's face changed completely. Because there was something about Stanford that no one in that room wanted brought up. And now it was. You could feel the shift immediately. Ava hadn't told many people about Stanford yet. She wanted to wait until the official announcement dinner we had planned for later that night. Mark's parents knew, of course. They had known for 3 weeks. Rachel did not. At least that's what she believed. Rachel forced a smile. "Stanford? That's ambitious." Ava stood there quietly. She hadn't expected any of this. None of us had. I stepped closer to her and put a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, Stanford. Full academic scholarship." A few guests started clapping. Someone said congratulations. Ava looked overwhelmed but relieved, like the air had finally returned to her lungs. Rachel's expression tightened. "That's strange," she said. Because Chloe was told there weren't any more spots available in her program. There was. Chloe had applied to Stanford early decision. She had been waitlisted, then rejected. It had been a sensitive subject for months. Rachel talked about it constantly, how unfair admissions were, how connections mattered more than talent. What Rachel didn't know was that Ava had applied to the same program. And got in. "Different track," I said calmly. "Engineering." Ava built half the robotics projects at her school. Rachel glanced at Chloe, who was staring at the floor now. Thomas cleared his throat. "Maybe this isn't the right time." "Actually, it is," I said. "Because for years Rachel has made comments about my daughter. About her not being competitive enough. Not outgoing enough. Not impressive enough." I let the room sit in that. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating her future. Instead, the first thing she hears is that she has no taste. Rachel's voice got sharper. "I didn't know this was some secret achievement party." "Wasn't," I said. "But maybe that's the problem." Mark finally stepped forward. "That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Rachel looked at Ava directly for the first time that evening. "Well, congratulations, I guess. Just don't expect college to be as easy as high school." That's when Ava spoke for the first time. I don't. Her voice was steady. Simple. No drama. Just facts. And that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because Chloe suddenly looked up and said, "Mom, stop." The entire room turned toward her. Chloe's face was flushed. She looked embarrassed, but not for the reason I expected. "Mom, you knew Ava got in." Rachel froze. Silence. Thomas's hand tightened around his glass. Rachel let out a small laugh. "Don't be ridiculous." Chloe shook her head. "You saw the email. At Grandma's house. You told me not to say anything." My heart started pounding. Rachel's eyes flicked to her parents, then back to Chloe. "That was private," she said quietly. Private. That word hung in the air like smoke. Because now it wasn't about a dress. It wasn't even about Stanford. It was about why Rachel would pretend not to know something that big. And why she would walk into this party ready to humiliate my daughter anyway. And judging by the look on my in-laws' faces, they were afraid of where this conversation was heading next. Rachel tried to recover quickly. "That email wasn't confirmed yet," she said. "I didn't think it was finalized." "It was finalized," Chloe replied. "You said we shouldn't mention it because it would make things awkward." Awkward. The word felt small compared to what was actually happening. Ava was standing very still beside me. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was just watching Rachel like she was finally seeing her clearly. My mother-in-law Diane stepped in. "Girls, please. This is a celebration." But the celebration had already changed shape. I looked at Rachel. "So you knew Ava got in. You knew for weeks. And you still chose tonight to mock her in front of everyone." Rachel's jaw tightened. "You're twisting this." Thomas finally spoke. "That's enough. This isn't appropriate." I looked at him. "What isn't appropriate? Telling the truth?" Mark touched my arm quietly, but he didn't ask me to stop. Rachel looked cornered now, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Fine," she said. "Yes, I knew. And yes, I think it's suspicious." The room shifted again. "Suspicious how?" I asked. Rachel gave a short laugh. "Stanford doesn't just hand out full scholarships to random public school kids. Let's not pretend we don't all know how the world works." There was not just jealousy, an accusation. Ava's acceptance wasn't earned, Rachel was implying. It was arranged. Thomas went pale in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Diane stared at the floor. That's when I understood why they were panicking earlier. Because they knew exactly what Rachel was hinting at. And they knew how wrong she was. I stepped forward. "Be careful, Rachel." She crossed her arms. "Or what? Or you're going to force me to explain something I wasn't planning to explain tonight." Mark looked at me sharply. "Milana." But it was too late. Rachel smiled slightly. "Go ahead. Explain." The guests were completely silent now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. I looked directly at my in-laws. "You're right about one thing, Rachel. Stanford doesn't just hand out full scholarships. Ava didn't get hers because of connections. She got it because 3 months ago she reported academic fraud inside her own school district." A ripple went through the room. Rachel blinked. "What?" Ava didn't move. I continued. "She discovered that several recommendation letters for certain students were being written by someone else. Inflated. Fabricated. And she reported it to the district anonymously." Rachel's face drained of color. Because Chloe had been one of the students with those glowing, unusually polished recommendations. And everyone in that room suddenly realized something else. Rachel's husband works on the school board. Thomas put his glass down slowly. "Milana, that's not confirmed." "It is," I said. "Because the district investigated quietly. And Stanford was notified. They reopened certain applications." Chloe looked like she might faint. Rachel shook her head. "That's not." Ava finally spoke. "I didn't know it was Chloe." Simple. Honest. That was the part that made it unbearable. She hadn't reported anyone out of spite. She had done it because it was wrong. Rachel looked at her daughter. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "You said everyone does it." The room felt like it was closing in. And suddenly Rachel wasn't angry anymore. She was exposed. And my in-laws weren't panicking about a dress. They were panicking because this wasn't just a family argument. It was starting to look like a public scandal. For a few seconds nobody moved. You could hear the air conditioning humming above us. Rachel looked at Chloe like she was trying to calculate how much damage had already been done. "This is ridiculous," Rachel said finally. "You're accusing my husband of something criminal at a birthday party." I didn't raise my voice. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm explaining why Ava earned her scholarship. Thomas stepped forward. Milana, the district investigation was confidential. Yes, I said. It was. Until Rachel suggested my daughter didn't deserve what she got. Rachel looked around the room searching for allies. Most of the guests were avoiding eye contact. A few of Mark's business acquaintances were whispering to each other. Chloe wiped her face and said something that changed everything. Dad told me it wasn't illegal. He said the counselor just helped polish some letters. Rachel turned sharply toward her. Stop talking. But Chloe didn't stop. He said it was normal. That competitive schools expect strong narratives. He said if other parents had the same access, they'd do it too. The silence after that was heavy. Because this wasn't about teenagers anymore. This was about adults who thought rules were optional. Ava looked at Chloe. I didn't know it was you. I just saw that the metadata on some recommendation files didn't match the teachers who supposedly wrote them. Several people frowned, confused. Ava continued. The timestamps showed they were edited from a private account linked to the school board server. So I sent it anonymously to the district ethics line. No drama. No exaggeration. Just facts. Rachel stared at her like she had never really understood who my daughter was. You went digging through private records? It wasn't private, Ava said. It was attached to a shared scholarship portal. Anyone who looked closely could see it. Thomas rubbed his forehead. This shouldn't be discussed here. But it already was. And then my mother-in-law Diane said something I didn't expect. Richard warned you, she said quietly to Rachel. Rachel stiffened. Don't bring him into this. But Diane continued. He said if anyone questioned the Stanford decisions publicly, it would draw attention back to the investigation. Now the room was piecing it together. Rachel hadn't insulted Ava randomly. She was trying to undermine her acceptance before anyone could connect it to the reopened admissions review. If Ava looked undeserving, then Chloe's rejection looked less suspicious. Rachel looked at me with something close to desperation. You planned this. I shook my head. I planned a birthday party. You walked in and decided to humiliate my daughter. Mark finally spoke clearly. Rachel, you need to stop. But Rachel wasn't listening anymore. She turned to Chloe. Did you tell them anything else? Chloe shook her head quickly. I didn't know about the investigation until after I got rejected. Dad said not to worry about it. There was again. That. Not Rachel. Her husband. And that's when I realized something that made even me uneasy. Rachel might have known about Ava's acceptance. But she hadn't known the investigation had gone beyond the school district. Thomas looked at his phone. His face changed. Milana, he said slowly. Did Ava ever speak directly to Stanford? Ava nodded once. They contacted me after the district forwarded the findings. I had to give a statement. Rachel's breath caught. Because that meant Stanford didn't just quietly adjust admissions. They had documentation. And if Stanford had documentation, then the board might be reviewing more than just recommendation letters. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from an unknown number. It was one sentence. We need to talk. No. I looked up. At the entrance of the hall stood Rachel's husband, Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be there tonight. And he looked like someone who had just realized the walls were closing in. Daniel didn't greet anyone. He walked straight toward Rachel, ignoring the guests, ignoring Mark, ignoring me. We need to go, he said quietly to her. Rachel didn't move. She was still staring at Ava like she was trying to undo the last 10 minutes. Go where, she asked. Home. No. Thomas stepped in front of Daniel. What's going on? Daniel hesitated for half a second, then looked at Ava. Did you keep copies of what you sent? The fact that he asked that in a room full of people told me everything. Ava answered calmly. Yes. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Rachel grabbed his arm. What are you talking about? He looked at her like he couldn't believe she had pushed this so far. The district didn't just review the letters, he said. They escalated it to the state board. Someone flagged misuse of board credentials. The room felt smaller again. Rachel shook her head. That's not possible. It already happened, Daniel replied. Chloe started crying quietly. I didn't know. Daniel's voice softened when he looked at her. I know. Then he looked at me. Was tonight really necessary? I met his gaze. You're asking me that after your wife tried to humiliate my daughter? He didn't answer. Because he knew the truth. If Rachel had stayed quiet, none of this would have surfaced publicly. The investigation would have continued behind closed doors. But she couldn't stand the idea of Ava being celebrated. Mark moved closer to me. Are we in the middle of something legal? Daniel nodded once. There's going to be a formal inquiry. They're reviewing communications from the board server, including mine. A murmur spread across the room. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was official. Rachel finally seemed to understand the scale of it. You said it was just formatting help, she whispered to Daniel. It started that way, he said. But someone reused access credentials. It created a trail. Ava didn't look triumphant. She looked uncomfortable. I didn't want anyone in trouble, she said. I just thought it wasn't fair. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Fair isn't something most adults build systems around, he said quietly. That might have been the most honest sentence of the night. Thomas straightened his jacket. We should take this conversation somewhere private. But it was too late for privacy. Several guests were already pretending not to listen while clearly listening to everything. Rachel's shoulders slumped. For the first time she looked small. You embarrassed me on purpose, she said to me. No, I replied. You embarrassed yourself. Daniel put his hand on Rachel's back. We're leaving. Chloe avoided Ava's eyes as they walked toward the exit. Right before she reached the door, she turned and said something unexpected. I'm sorry. Ava nodded once. No dramatic reconciliation. No speeches. Just two 18-year-old girls standing in the aftermath of their parents' decisions. When the door closed behind them, the room stayed silent. Then Mark looked at me. That escalated. Yes, I said. But the night wasn't over yet. As my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Stanford's admissions office. And it made my stomach drop. I didn't want to open the message. For a second I just stared at the screen while the room slowly tried to return to something normal. A few guests drifted toward the dessert table. Someone turned the music back on quietly, like we were testing whether the night could still be saved. Mark looked at me. What is it? It's from Stanford, I said. Ava's eyes shifted to my phone. I opened it. It wasn't long. Due to ongoing external review related to the district investigation, we need to reconfirm documentation connected to Ava's admission file. This does not indicate wrongdoing on her part. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. My heart pounded. Rachel's stunt hadn't just exposed her own family. It had dragged Ava back into the process. Mark read over my shoulder. That's standard language, he said. It doesn't mean they're rescinding anything. I nodded, but my hands were cold. Ava looked calm. It's fine, she said. I kept everything. Every email. Every timestamp. I didn't do anything wrong. And that was the difference between her and the adults who had just walked out. She didn't cut corners. She didn't hide behind influence. She didn't need to tear anyone down to feel secure. Thomas approached slowly. Moana, I didn't know Rachel was going to behave like that. I believe you, I said. Diane looked shaken. This will spread. Maybe, I said. Or maybe people will mind their own business. Ava surprised me then. Can we cut the cake? It was such a simple sentence that it almost made me laugh. Yes, I said. We gathered around. The candles were relit. Someone started singing again, a little off-key but genuine this time. When Ava blew out the candles, she didn't hesitate. Later, after most guests had left, she helped me collect plates. Are you okay? I asked her. Yeah, she said. I'm glad it happened. Glad? She nodded. Now I know. Know what? Who was waiting for me to fail. That hit harder than anything Rachel had said. A few days later, Stanford confirmed her admission officially again. The review didn't change anything. If anything, it strengthened her file. They commended her for reporting the issue ethically. As for Daniel, the formal inquiry went forward. He resigned from the school board before it concluded. There were no criminal charges, but there were penalties and public scrutiny. Rachel stopped attending extended family gatherings after that. We didn't chase them away. They just couldn't stand being in a room where the truth had already been spoken. Looking back, I sometimes wish Ava's 18th birthday had been simpler. But if I had stayed silent that night, if I had let Rachel's words hang in the air unanswered, my daughter would have learned a different lesson. She would have learned that keeping peace matters more than protecting yourself. Instead, she learned this. When someone tries to make you feel small to cover their own fear, you don't shrink. You stand still. And you let the truth do the work. A mother will always stand on her child's side. No matter who panics.